Well, good morning, Miguel. It is May 10th, 2022. This is part two of the oral history segment with Miguel Hernandez. And of course, this is the Civil Rights Oral History Project revisited 20 some years after the first edition.
Yeah.
And I'm here with conciliator Miguel Hernandez. So thank you, Miguel. To start this morning, Miguel indicated he wanted to make some corrections to the dates and names and some other issues
Okay.
from the first part of the oral history. So Miguel, I'll give the floor to you to do
Okay.
that.
I will also send these to you by email. But, I began really working for the federal government back with the U.S. Office of Economic Opportunity, which was in the executive office of the president, which sounded grandiose, but it wasn't really that grandiose. But I started there on March 27, 1967, and I was there for 4 years. And then I joined the CRS on April 5th of 1971. And I was there for 6 years. And then subsequently, I found a job with the New York City Commission on Human Rights as its executive director. And I was there for 4 years from August 1st of 77 to December of 1981. In reaching that period, I was there for about 7 years. And then I came back to CRS in 1988 on October 11th of 1988. And I was there for 7 years. And then in 1995, I was RIFT, a reduction in force. And I landed a job with the DEA, and I was there for 2 years, from 1996 to 1998, September 14th, when I retired. So that's basically, the chronology.
That's
anyway,
really clear. So I
okay.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the perfect point to
Yeah.
highlight that. Is there anything else you wanted to highlight?
No, I just want to say that traveling around different agencies, like I forgot to mention that I was with the Lent Executive Program, which was run by the Civil Service Commission. And they let me out to various nonprofits, agencies. So all in all, I picked up a lot of information. I learned a lot by working with these different agencies, and I saw how they operated. That was so different from the Community Relations Service. So that's basically, what I took away from my entire federal career. So what I got to do, if you don't mind, is I'd like to answer the questions you had, because I think the answers are pretty short. And then we can go back to the street mediation, okay?
That sounds
Okay.
perfect.
Okay.
And for the reader or for the viewer, I've of course sent Miguel many other questions in advance. And so we'll go through the questions in essentially chronological order, and we'll go from there. So Miguel, what we want to do right now then is look broadly at a quote typical case, knowing of course that no case at CRS is typical. You've already described an array of cases that were atypical, whether it was the Texaco judge referred case, or whether it was your case in cases in Caribbean countries connected down there, or your case with the Jewish community in the New York City borough. There's so much diversity there. It's quite incredible. So if you could, though, think of that typical case, and can you identify the type of roadblocks you might encounter in your efforts to work with parties effectively, and how you might try to overcome or surpass those roadblocks?
Well, the major roadblock, and I think maybe other people in the agency experienced this, was people were always, at least initially, suspicious of you. Maybe it was the fact that you worked for the Justice Department, and they tended to confuse us with the FBI and other law enforcement agencies. So you had a difficult time, I had a difficult time anyway, overcoming that initial suspicion. And basically the only way that I found was effective for me was to find somebody in the community who perhaps could vouch for you in some way. Either they had known about CRS in the past, or they weren't conspiracy minded, conspiracy oriented types. And you could really explain to them what CRS, and particularly the fact that anything they said to you that they said was confidential, you were duty bound to keep it confidential. People didn't always believe that, of course, but by repetition, I think, it ultimately came over, and people were more open to talking to you. Okay, so that I found to be the major roadblock. The other one was that you really didn't have at hand, most of the time anyway, the resources that you really needed. A lot of these cases, whether it was street mediation or table mediation, they were complicated cases. And you really needed more than one person involved. You needed at least a person that you could bounce ideas off of and say, I want to do this. What do you think? And that kind of stuff. I mean, you could call back somebody and so forth, but they weren't with you. Okay. So lack of resources in that sense was very critical. We also were able to solve that from time to time because at one point the agency was what we called programmatic. And this was one of the great ideas that Ben Holman, I think he was the second or third director of CRS, I forget, but he had come from the media. He was a reporter for a Chicago paper, and he had achieved some level of notoriety, I want to call it. I wouldn't call it that, but he was a known person, and because he had reported on the Black Panthers back in the day, very early on, and I think he won a Pulitzer Prize for his reporting. I'm not positive about that, but he would know. Anyway, Ben decided that what we really needed to do is to have subject matter experts in the agency in various, I think I may be repeating myself, but anyway, he said he wanted to have a person with housing background, law enforcement, economic development, media relations, and some other areas, because he felt, and I think rightly so, that the root of the problem wasn't really the fact that a police officer had shot and killed a Black person, or whatever misconduct there was that sparked the disturbance or the demonstration, or the problem was really much deeper than that. He felt it was a lack of resources, so he wanted to get somebody who could help go through that. Yes, you had to deal with the police officer or whatever the spark was, and try to put that out or dampen or redirect it, so forth. But you had to get to the lack of resources in the community to address problems. In media, for example, since he was a media person, he gave us people who were knowledgeable about the media and how the media works and what the media needed from us and needed to do in the community, and how they should report on how minorities were being portrayed in the media. So because almost every story about a media person in some kind of situation was a negative. You know, he was arrested, you know, he or she did this, that, and the other thing. And it could have been true that the person did so forth, but it was then generalized, okay, to include the whole community. So the very things that were reported about the white community doing wonderful things was reported, but the wonderful things that minorities, Hispanics, Blacks, etc., did were not reported. So he wanted us to correct that problem, because that was, he saw that as one of the problems. Okay. He was a quirky person. I mean, quirky in a good sense. He sent out memos to the staff about this, that, and the other thing, but he didn't send out memos. He sent out goldenrods.
What do you mean by goldenrod? I don't know that
Goldenrods,
term.
and it came. The memo came to you on a bright yellow piece of paper, okay, which meant like, this is goddamn important. You better listen to this, or you better do this. I want you to do this, that's the other thing. So of course he did a lot of things that were different, but anyway.
I'm sorry, I've got to stop you about the goldenrods.
Yes.
Is that your term? Is that like staff and CRS?
Yes, that was a term that he used.
He used it. Okay.
Yes, goldenrod.
Oh.
Okay. so we laughed at it from time to time, you know. Oh, here comes another goldenrod and so forth. But anyway, that was his way of getting the message across to you. He didn't get a lot of them, but you know, when you got it, you knew that this was something that was bugging him and that he wanted you to work on or do or listen to it. So, okay. Most of it had to do with casework, not disciplinary stuff, not you screwed up or anything like that. You know, it was, this is a thing that I think is good for us to do. And that's the way, at least that's the way I took it. Anyway, others can speak for themselves. Anyhow, getting back just for a moment to the media thing, and I'll sort of end with that. He also had us looking at, for example, at the licenses, the broadcasting licenses of stations, TV stations, radio stations, and so forth. And the idea was that we should see if these were challengeable. You know, that every few years, a station's media license would expire and it'd have to renew and all this other stuff. So we had to look at that, and you know, with the media person, and see what was it a proper thing to do to challenge the license, or for not for us to challenge it, but for a community group to challenge it. Was this a viable tool? You know, people, you know, community groups did demonstrations, petitions, you know, a whole variety of things to try to correct the situation. So this was one more kind of thing that a community might consider doing if it was appropriate to the situation. So that's what I'm saying. He wanted to get to the root of the problem and provide people with the tools themselves to solve that problem. Okay. You know, the challenge to licenses never came from us, and we didn't, you know, and we never suggested to a group that they do that. But if the issue rose that we're not being fairly treated in the media, okay, you got to look at the media. There's a whole other issues. You know, like media has deadlines they have to meet. They have to, in some way, fashion or other, you know, they have sponsors. They have, you know, TV stations have sponsors, radio stations, newspapers rely on advertising, you know, so we have to know what the constraints are for a media and make the community aware of those constraints. It was very key. Anyway, he did that in a whole lot of different other areas, but that was why I thought he was, even though I always considered myself obviously not a subject matter expert, but a specialist, like in the medical field, you would call me a general practitioner. Okay, you know. Anyway, that was that.
Well, that's really interesting, that this idea to bring in subject matter experts to kind of help you get through some of the staffing
Yeah.
issues and to provide those experts
Yeah.
perhaps across the country or regionally.
Yeah.
So you mentioned folks being initially suspicious as roadblocks. With respect to the initial suspicion, you found someone to vouch for you, and you use that confidentiality to highlight, look, I'm not going to share this with the FBI or other parts of DOJ. Were there any other hurdles you wanted to address?
Well, if I went into a situation where there was a Hispanic community involved, as an example, the establishment felt that because I was also Hispanic, obviously Hernandez, to pronounce it properly, is of the same ethnic group as our opponents. Therefore, he is going to favor them. So when you get to the aspect of neutrality, the establishment was suspicious of you as well, okay? Or at least had a, obviously they would be polite and so forth, but in some ways it came across that you were not really considered a neutral. You were considered to be with them also because you basically, you know, came from the civil rights aspect in a way. You were not neutral, okay? So that's something that had to be overcome time to time. And how you maintain your integrity, so if I can use that word, you know, as a minority person, and when if somebody says something like, the typical one is, oh, but you're different, you're special, you're an educated one, was a comment I got many times, okay? So that was another problem that you had to sensitize yourself to, in a sense that you had to say, okay, I know what he's trying to say, and just basically let it go. But sometimes you had to address it full on, which is rare. But anyway, that was a continual problem, being from a minority group, being from this is what they believed to be, you were investigating them, okay? You were part of the FBI or whatever it was. Even with police chiefs and other people they were simply not, let me put it this way, not educated about what CRS was, and you have to re-educate them.
So can we go back to the example where you're trying to balance your integrity as a representative of the Hispanic or Latinx, now Latinx community, it might be called, and your neutrality as a CRS
Yeah.
mediator.
Yeah.
Can you give me an example of where you had to address those aggressions? I think I was thinking now we often talk about microaggressions, but what you talked about is you're one of the educated ones.
Mhm.
Someone saying that,
Yeah.
that's just an aggression, right?
Yeah.
That's a racist statement.
Yeah.
And sometimes in your role, you would let that go because your role is to focus on
Yes.
the tension in the community, not on your
Yeah.
role in it. But
Yeah.
when did it cross that line, and what would you do?
Well, I think the most example that it happened fairly frequently, but one of the major ones that I do recall at the moment was when I was working with the Hasidim in Williamsburg. This was a battle between Puerto Ricans on the one hand and Hasidim on the other. So being Puerto Rican, principally, actually, born in Puerto Rico, Puerto Rican parents and grandparents, and going back to the 1850s there. Yeah, I had to overcome that initially. And things were said to me, but basically I had Jewish allies on the other side too, who were able to speak to me and say, oh, Miguel is fair. Okay. Miguel, something, words along that line. And we strove initially and everything to say, look, I'm a neutral third party intervener. Big words. I said, what that really means is that I'm going to be fair. I'm going to try to judge other. I said, look, I have feelings. Okay, I have feelings, I would say. But I'm a professional. I work for the U.S. Department of Justice. And what we're taught is to be fair and to act as a fair person. Okay. So that's how we got into it. But yeah, maybe when you got back to the hotel or wherever it was and you talked about it, and you say, well, that SOB said this to me, blah, blah. Yeah. And you get it off your chest that way. So there you go.
Yeah, really, really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I want to loop back to the media. You were talking about how you had a media specialist. You were looking at licenses so that potentially you could not tell community activists what to do, but just have asked them, inquire, what have you looked into with respect to the media? What were there any other roles that the media played in situations commonly, both in terms of making it better and making it worse? You talked about the articles that only featured the positive of the white majority community.
Yeah.
But in the moment, were there positive roles the media played? Did you have partners in the media, and were there times when the media was
No, I didn't. I mean, I tried to be as friendly as possible, and friendly, I mean, genial, polite, that kind of stuff, to reinforce the neutrality aspects of being a mediator, conciliator, whatever you want to call it. So that was I had a lot of contact with media, but what they were trying to get at was the sensational aspects. The whole thing about if it bleeds, it leads. And I understood that, that this is what they want to get at, but that I was bound to the neutral aspects of CRS and to the the code of omerta, silence. Confidentiality is the real word. And I even had a situation once where upstate New York, several black kids were arrested, and at a local college, and a whole black kids, and the whole scandal arose because they were led into the court in chains, like as if they were. This is New York State. This is not the South, you know. And of course, that was raised a lot of eyebrows, particularly in the media. So I was talking to the community, and the press really wanted to emphasize that, and I understand why. Okay, but again, I said, I'm a neutral. I'm here to help the community and the broader community. Meaning, when I said community, not just the Black community, bring about positive changes. But they kept asking, and in one case, even the judge, I believe it was the judge in that case. No, I know it was the judge in that particular case. Wanted me to testify in court, you know, and threatened that if I didn't testify, I would go to jail, which I could go to jail if I said anything. So I had to call. This is the one instance where headquarters helped me. You know, they said, Mr. Hernandez can't testify, you know. And in fact, they said to me, he says, make sure you take a toothbrush with you when you go to jail. Anyway, so yeah, neutrality was a hard thing to attain, and keeping things confidential was a very difficult issue at times, particularly when the press was involved.
Yeah, that's really fascinating that a judge was potentially going to throw you in jail if you didn't testify. And DOJ had, that was a state judge, I assume?
No, it was a local judge, you know, small town, small county, upstate New York. You know, it was a rural area, so not that there's anything wrong with that, but that's who he was. That's where it was.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So I want to talk a little bit about goals and settlement. When you entered into a community and were working with the community, were you working to settle the question that was presented for a limited, for a settlement, a written settlement that just addresses one particular issue in the community, the issue you were called there to go to, or were you trying to secure larger systemic change in the community?
I believed I tried to address his systemic changes first and foremost, because you had to get to the root of the problem. Okay, the root of the problem, and you had to get the community to say, this is really the problem. Yes, a white officer acted improperly, or did whatever he did that was not good. And you say, well, what was behind that? What is really going on? And then you would get a whole history of what happened in this community before. These disturbances or demonstrations didn't start the day the incident happened. Okay. And that was kind of a thing that was drilled into me by a guy named Bob Lamb, who worked with us he was in the Northeast office where I was. Captain Bob Lamb. He was a former police captain in Atlantic City. Anyway, so yeah, I can't. And the fact that the agency was building on that programmatic aspect of it was also part of that, to look further into the problem. So settlement could mean a whole bunch of different things, not necessarily a written agreement between the parties. But, you know, sometimes it did, but in my experience, rarely. Most of it was that the police department or the municipality or school superintendent, or whatever it was, took a specific action that came up as a complaint by the community of things that should be done. This could have included, for example, the establishment of a police review board, the establishment of a human rights commission or committee, the court taking action against a real estate industry, local industry, to institute non-discriminatory policies. So that those kinds of things generally, or a meeting, you know, on a series of ongoing meetings with the between the Chamber of Commerce and the minority community, to address things like jobs and so forth. So it wasn't always a written document. That came in, you know, later on, but initially it was, they should do this. One of the things that was often recommended was quote unquote sensitivity training, you know, of the police department, and generally could be others, but. And so we went forth and we were conducting the training and everything else. But as the years went by, I came to the conclusion, I don't know if others did, but my conclusion was, you know, this is not really effective. Because you forced everybody in that police department, not you, but generally, you know, the chief, you know, I said, oh, okay, everybody's going to go to sensitivity training now. Mr. Hernandez has recommended this to us, and you're going to do it. And most of the cops would sit there with their arms folded, you know. They would listen, they would be polite, you know, it wasn't any, but you know, the guy who did the crime, if I can call it that, you know, put quotes around the crime, who did the thing, he might have been there too, but why was everybody else in there? And because, and why was this mandatory? Why did everybody have to be there? You know, you took them in different ships and all that stuff. And was this really getting, regardless, was this really getting, was this changing attitudes? Was this making cops, as an example, or teachers, if it was in a school case, less racist, more sensitive? Those are the questions I was asking myself. My impression was that really wasn't what was happening. You know, maybe in some instances I was preaching to the choir, okay, since everybody was there, including the black cops, you know. So a lot, I mean, our training was for free, but a lot of communities hired consultants. It became a whole industry almost of people going out and preaching sensitivity training. So anyway, I don't know what this has to really get back to the question, but sensitivity training was one of the things in our toolkit, so to speak. And it's sort of like You know, we went into Afghanistan to train the Afghans how to fight. Really? I mean, these people have been fighting for thousands of years. They probably know more about fighting. They could teach us something. You know what I'm saying? So, training was a tool that was used, and I don't know about anybody else. Speaking for myself only, I came to the conclusion after a while that it was not. If they told me to do it, I would do it. Okay, I would say no, I'm not going to do it, but maybe my heart wasn't in it anymore after a while.
So I hear you on the training.
Yeah.
And it sounds like a lot of the training was maybe
Yeah.
The implication of it was a one-time training. And people
Yeah.
How do you make an impact on the people that need to have an impact made? Not the choir, but the people who aren't in the choir. How do you make that impact then?
I think, well, there isn't any one way. As you know, the Civil Rights Division and the FBI has arrested a lot of cops. And lately, a lot of them are going to jail, and the juries are not buying their stories and so forth. So that's making an impact. Okay, it's coercive impact, but maybe that's making an impact on how police act. I don't know for sure. But all the lawsuits that have been brought in the past, the cop doesn't pay for it, right? The guy who kills somebody and, doesn't pay for it really. He gets supported by the union and so forth. So I think maybe what's making an impact is the actual arrests and so forth. And what needs to happen perhaps is that the immunity, that personal immunity that some police officers have, maybe that, if I run over and kill a person, ultimately, yes, I have insurance. Maybe cops should have insurance, but I'm held to account, even though I've already, But anyway, I think.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate.
I'm sorry.
Is there anything? No, you're okay. Is there anything in your role as CRS that you found more effective than delivering the training? I think that was the.
Yeah.
That's a better question, and
yeah,
I think what I'm more interested in.
Okay.
From a CRS perspective, what is more effective in making that culture change?
Well, one of the things, culture change is also another thing is, communities, they want justice. I understand that, and rightly so. But law enforcement also has a culture, okay? But we never talked about that. I think we could have done more on that area, saying, here's how police operate and why they operate this way. Not that it would necessarily bring changes in the community, but it would at least make people think about how they're going to get redress. Okay, what is effective for changing police behavior? And it has to start with both sides, and if you do in mediation, both sides, teaching both sides what the thinking is on the other side and why they're saying certain things and doing certain things. Okay, so culture is not limited to training. It should not be limited simply to training the police to be more sensitive, but instead of helping the community understand how the police and why they think that way. Police officers generally come from police backgrounds. Their father was a cop, their grandfather may be a cop, and so forth. They live in a very closed-in society themselves. They associate with other cops. They go to parties, they drink with other cops, and so forth and so on. So they develop a certain um, um, brotherhood, if you will, is a term that's used among themselves. And so we need communities need to understand that, but also not necessarily in a negative way, but in a positive way. And this will help them, I think, formulate their approach to the resolution of the problem a little bit more effectively. Not that you say, oh, we're going to love the cops. The cops are wonderful. No, that's not it. But we understand what's going on here, why this happens, and how can we change that viewpoint. It can't be done in a training session for cops. Okay, it's a short-term thing, whether I do it or, a consultant does it. It takes a while. It's that trust building process that has to happen on some level.
And have you been involved in communities that have set up such a process to develop that trust, to develop that information sharing between police and community?
Well, I identified this couple, husband and wife, who were actors, professional actors, and they've been on Broadway and off Broadway, that kind of stuff. And they were also former police officers. And they developed this training thing where they had scenarios. And one of the scenarios was like a traffic stop. That a lot of these disturbances get set off at traffic stop situations. So, they had a little consulting firm that had other actors, so they would get people to play, or they played them, so either a policeman or a driver in a typical road stop, highway stop, whatever it was. Excuse me a second. I need to put on another light here. It's dark in this room. I don't know. I hope that's better. Okay. I hope that's a better picture. Anyway, we worked with them. We did some training even for the police department on instances where another thing that sets off disturbances and whatnot is police go in, somebody's acting strangely, a family member calls the police department, the police department responds, and for one reason or another, known or unknown, the person that was supposed to be helped winds up dead or badly injured. So again, there are calls for the police department should call a health expert or so forth. Most of your police departments in this country are about 10 people on average. The large ones, New York City and Cleveland, you name it, they have more resources. But most police departments are 10 people. They don't have a health expert, it's just a call. Anyhow, so they did training in that sense, and we did this for a lot of. I went around with them to do it at various schools about how a teenager should respond when he's stopped. Now, at that time, this was a new thing, but now you hear parents are telling minority parents, I gave my son the talk, it's called now, the talk. Okay, so we started the talk a long time ago. And so we found that was kind of positive. It was accepted both by the police department who were present most of the time, with a combined police community group, and we did these scenarios, so to speak. And they were good because they were, the people were professional actors. And we had a thing called citizen travel, where we could get consultants, you know, like these people, and pay them $100 a day. You couldn't get more than $100 a day. And they had to travel, you know, like we did, not first class, you know, tourist class, if you want to call it that. And for whatever reason, they accepted those conditions. And so we were able to bring in people like that, you know. So anyway, this was an instance where we talked about police culture, we talked about community culture. Both sides were there, and voluntarily, okay? Nobody was forced to be there. And I think it was effective, you know, my opinion.
I appreciate that illustration and about an effective way for larger systemic change and changing the culture of conversations in the community. So how did you measure the success of your efforts at CRS?
You know, I could never really find a way. We didn't have a measure of success. You know, once we didn't have an evaluative component within CRS, okay, who knew how to do that, and what were the questions? How did you know you achieved success? So did you achieve success because you came out with a written agreement, or did you achieve success because they started a human rights commission or a police review commission, whatever it was? I guess you could measure it by those things. Something would happen, but we didn't have a real evaluation after, you know, afterwards. That was the missing component. So, and then we were hampered by the confidentiality clause as well, because, you know, the FBI can say they solved X number of cases, they arrested X number of, you know, and if you achieve peace in the community, nothing happened. You know what I mean? What do you? And is it, there was no more trouble for the next 3 months, the next 5 years, the next 10 years, what? You know, so I think they have to come up with some way to measure this kind of very complex and by the seat of your pants mediation, if you want to call it that. Okay, we didn't have that. We don't have that component. To say we did this, that. Yeah, once a year they did an annual report, and they said we responded to, you know, X number of school cases, police cases, what have you. But no, we had internally, I mean, ourselves, and, you know, was there a review? Did somebody sit down with you from management afterwards and say, maybe you should have done this better, or blah, blah, blah? I mean, if you did something really screwed up, they would tell you, you know.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, difficult to measure.
Yeah.
So this question may not be as applicable to you given your retirement date in the late 90s, but you were at CRS during for two stints, decades apart.
Yeah.
So from your perspective, how did the changing nature of civil rights movements and protests activities impact your work?
Well, I guess one thing happened after a while, after the Wild and Woolly's 60s and 70s. Police departments did learn how to deal with demonstrations for the most part. Some of the bigger ones did, you know, they didn't panic, so to speak. I mean, there were instances where they, you know, people, they acted inappropriately, but they already were doing, or they tried to do what we preach: meet with the other side, okay? Find out what they want to do, help them in a sense, okay? Like organize demonstration, self-policing, okay? Marshals, we often use that as a tool, get people from the community to maintain order, right? Cops tended to stay in the background, okay? They would send out orders like we call no hats and bats, meaning, you know, don't go to a demonstration, you know, with your helmet on and your, you know, as your first thing. Keep those people in a, you know, in a staging area, invisible to the where it's going, but only bring them in if something really, you know, hits the fan. So a lot of police departments learned how to respond to demonstrations, you know, and these were things that initially came out to CRS. Like we would say, well, look, I mean, it sounds like a stupid thing, but you know, you complain about people pissing on people's lawns, okay, to be very, you know, along the prayer. Why don't you get some porta potties? I mean, you know, so police departments started to do things like that. Then they had basically their initially if they had a police community relations group, they would bring those would be the people that would talk to the community. Okay, before they didn't really exist all that much. More the police community was more like a PR thing with the media and so forth. But now the police departments know to send certain people out ahead of a demonstration. You know, it doesn't always work, of course. You know, things do get out of hand, as we have learned recently. But for the most part, police departments learned that whole thing. And the communities, I think, sometimes think of, well, if they say we should hold a demonstration, but that'd be okay to do. But this is what's gonna happen. It's more orchestrated. Okay, there's more planning that goes into it. That has changed in the civil rights, you know, aspect of it. The other thing is, because of age, deaths, the civil rights leadership of the 60s isn't there anymore. Okay, there are new people coming up. This isn't really a civil rights problem. I'm going to relate to this, but you know, the Amazon strike in New York City, you have a whole brand new leadership, okay, of people, you know, have come up, and the same thing I think is happening in the civil rights area now. You don't know who they are. Black Lives Matter is an example of that as well in the civil rights thing. It's a different thing. There isn't any one leader. I mean, yes, there is a person who initially organized BLM and, you know, is interviewed in the media and so forth. But Black Lives Matter is much broader. It's more leadership.
And did you have any experience working with decentralized leadership groups? I know Black Lives Matter wasn't around, but
no.
Can you say more about how you worked with decentralized leadership groups?
No, because a lot of the people that work with CRS, you know, we had a lot of people that, not a lot of people, several people, put it that way, that were ministers, okay, that had come into CRS, and we, you know, particularly in the southern region, people out of the civil rights movement, okay, that switched sides, as it were, and went to work for the Justice Department. Okay, so, but anyway, So no, the people that we related to because of that, generally speaking, there was a, well, did you call the head of the NAACP? You know, the trust, there were agencies, you know, NAACP was one, CORE was another one that we called from time to time, and we had contacts with regularly, okay? In fact, sometimes they would call CRS, tell us, you know, we got this problem, blah, blah, blah. So no, but where the unelected leaders showed up, if I want to call them leaders, but unelected people, was when we had formal mediations. You know, you would get people from the community, you know, who, I'm not saying it was a bad thing, but it was difficult because they were they were usually generally very intransigent about what they wanted. Whereas, you know, when you dealt with the NAACP or any CORE, you know, even SNCC, they had a sense of where they wanted to go with this, with the demonstration, what was going on. But no, we never.
That's really interesting, because that connects back to your comments from the last interview about community mediations, that you never, one of your concerns is who are the stakeholders in a real community mediation. You never really knew. So I want to get to those, back to those community leaders and those who demand justice. You mentioned justice a couple times, but some today demand justice and have no real interest or willingness to negotiate. Did you encounter individuals like that in your work before you retired? And how did you deal with it?
Well, yes. Initially, everybody is locked into their positions. You know, it's sort of like a in that sense, a labor mediation, although I don't equate it to really, but yeah, people are locked in at first. And you have to keep going at it until you find some area of common ground, or something happens that changes the dynamics of the negotiation. So you have to be aware of things. You have to keep your eye on what could change minds here. What would make people come around to an idea that says, okay, we want the police chief fired. That was always one of the major ones. You know, we want him fired right now. Okay, and after a while, you know, people come around and say, you know, this is going to take a long time. You know, I mean, the chief has civil service protections. He has, you know, vested interest in the community. Police chiefs are political people, by the way. You know, they don't get their jobs because they just took a test. You know, somebody picked them. Usually, the chief elected official of the community or the council or whatever. And the smaller the community, the more politics there are. Anyway,
that's probably right.
So, but anyway, getting people to change their minds can be difficult, if not impossible.
What about those who demand justice and say, look, I am not going to engage with you because simply by engaging with you, I am violating my integrity to my commitment to justice?
You know what? I never had anybody say that to me or imply it that way. No, I never had that.
What about political polarization? How did political polarization impact your work? You described earlier one example where there was a political issue and you said, look, I can't mediate that. I'm sorry, I may be referencing another oral history, but what about polarization? Did that impact your work?
You mean like Republicans versus Democrats?
Yeah, in a local community, though.
Not really, no, no. I never had that. We don't, to the level that it is now, certainly not. Or even into small issues that were political in a sense, in terms of party, a party thing, one way or another, or your guy wouldn't talk to somebody else because he was a Republican or because he was a Democrat or a liberal or a conservative. I never experienced that. CRS did respond to a political situation. I forget the year it was, but Miami had the Democratic and Republican conventions the same summer, one right after the other. And this was when the Vietnam War was going on. And it was called Operation Snowplow.
Snowplow?
Snowplow.
In Miami?
Somebody had a sense of humor. It wasn't me. And so we went down to Miami and they had a whole team of people. I mean, we had a large team of people. And so all of us got assigned to work with different groups because, they were basically, the thing was that there was some impact on minority communities in the minority area, Black, Hispanic, and so forth, who were involved in the demonstrations, and I got assigned to go to Flamingo Park, which was where was the encampment of the various protest groups there. They had tents of, and I had two groups that I had to maintain relationships with. One was the Vietnam veterans who were there, and oh God, I'm blocking. I'm not blocking on him. I just can't come up with it. Ron Kovic, was it? He was the big kahuna insofar as the Vietnam Veterans Organization. And I also had to be the liaison with the gay community groups. They were in different parts of the park. And anyway, so, and then I had to go to, had to be present at a lot of the committee meetings that the Democrats held and the Republicans held, in case something happened. I don't know what the heck I could do, but I was there. In case something happened, maybe a minority group tried to burst into the doors or something, which never happened, but it was all very interesting. Anyway, so that was as political as we got, as far as, I really don't know. There wasn't very much minority demonstrations, although things got out of hand. One time, we were at a Burdine department store in downtown Miami. And
this is at during
Burdine's,
these conventions.
Yeah. And the police threw tear gas in there. Oh God.
Into the department store?
Closed underground parking lot, So we got tear gas. I laugh at it now, but it wasn't funny at the time.
It's not going to disperse for a while.
Yeah, Burdine. And Burdine was a Jewish owned. I think he was Jewish and Cuban, Burdine. And so that created a whole fuss in the Jewish and the Cuban community because of all that happened. So anyway, I marched with the veterans, and I marched with the gay groups, and but that was as political as it got.
So how then do changes in administrations affect the work of CRS? I don't know that you were there for any transitions, but yeah. How, from your perspective, did transitions affect the work?
Well, yes. I got riffed during the Clinton administration, and the Clinton administration. I'm a Democrat. I'm what I call a cradle Democrat, born and raised in the Democratic mold. Okay, probably. But they caved into demands of the Republican Party to reduce CRS, okay, several times. And Janet Reno, I love her to death, but I guess she had no choice, and so that really reduced the agency a lot. But there were other rifts at different times, early on when I was there, and later on. Rifts were kind of and the administrations were also whether they're Democratic or Republican, to appoint a director to CRS. I think the last guy with any length of service was Gil Pompa. But after that, it became acting directors, no directors. And they really wanted to kill CRS. They wanted to do it. The fellow was no longer needed. So the budget, at one time, I think we had maybe under Ben Holman, we had maybe close to 300 people, maybe more. I don't know, 400. I forget the numbers, but because we had all of the subject matter people and so forth. But after that, reduction after reduction after reduction, until the last one, when Trump came in, it was like, I mean, I wasn't there when Trump came in, but it was down to practically 13 people at one time, 15 people maybe, But yeah, the administrations have a lot to do with it, whether they were Republican or Democratic. We did have a honeymoon period there with Nixon, believe it or not. Ed Meese was his attorney general. And for some reason, Ed Meese liked CRS. I don't know if it was personal experience or whatever, or he saw it as a valuable tool. When Nixon was there, I got to go to the Virgin Islands and be there numerous times, all up because of the Vice President Agnew. Did I tell you this story? I hope I'm not repeating myself. Okay. Well, there was a big murder case in the Virgin Islands called the Fountain Valley Murders, where a group of African Americans, Black men, dressed up in military fashion and went to the Fountain Valley Golf Club, which was a rich golf club of people and tourists, and they shot up the place. They were attempting to rob it and declare independence supposedly independence for the Virgin Islands. All right. So I think 5 people were killed. I don't know how many people were wounded or anything. And everybody was literally in the Virgin Islands up in arms. The Vice President Agnew had a condo on St. Croix. So he called somebody at CRS, the director, I guess, and said, look, my neighbors are calling me, they're all upset, da, 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 da. I said, is there anything you can do, that you guys can do? So the Attorney General, me, said, yeah, I know these guys at CRS. Well, let's get them involved. So I got picked along with Wally Warfield to go down and straighten out this whole mess down there. I mean, it really was a mess. I mean, yeah, of course, the FBI was there, the marshals were there, You know, the only thing they didn't have is the U.S. Marine Corps. You know, they had a lot of firepower went down there. And our job was really to talk to the minority and the white community. And I have to say, we did a fantastic job, particularly with the white community. Chamber of Commerce, we worked on the Hotel Owners Association, you know, because people were arming themselves and they were ready for the next, you know, big event. So after that, anything happened in the Virgin Islands after that, no matter how minor, I got called in to go down and talk to people, which I did, and I was very proud, frankly, of what I was able to do.
Yeah, so you engage the minority communities and the Chamber of Commerce, the Hotel Owners Association.
Yeah.
And when you went back, could you see the lasting impact of that? And
yeah,
how
you
did
could
observe it?
see that, you know, particularly we had one instance where a U.S. land-based corporations bought a hotel. It's called Hotel on the Key. It's still there. And Hotel on the Key is there's a little island, slightly bigger than your living room. No, I'm exaggerating, but it's really tiny. And there's a hotel on it. Anyway, they bought this hotel and they brought in management from, I don't know, Indiana, where they were from. And the first thing they did was to close the hotel off to the community. Now the beach, people used to go there, they go swimming and everything. There's a beautiful beach there and everything. And the beaches were in essence public property. So we had to talk to them, you know, and say, look, yeah, you can own the hotel. Obviously, nobody's going to take it away from you, you know, but this beach is a public beach. You know, it's been there for hundreds of years. You know? Anyway, so we finally got them to drop that policy, and peace and harmony were restored thanks to me. I lost.
My fault.
Okay.
You mentioned CRS staffing at times.
Yes.
And 300-400 and down to 13.
Yeah.
CRS is so my understanding they're trying to hire right now.
Yes.
But what is sufficient need for staffing, or what's a sufficient staffing level at CRS? And when when you were with CRS and there wasn't sufficient staffing, did you ever partner with other organizations, either on state, feds, or local?
Okay, let me answer the latter question first. Back then, every region had a federal regional council, which was a group of the major and even minor federal agencies, but mostly those agencies that had funds to distribute or had resources, like HUD, for example. Okay. And CRS at the regional level, actually it was our Wally Warfield was the person designated to sit at these meetings, and they would talk about, kind of an update to update all the other agencies, because a lot of this stuff overlaps that federal agencies do. And so they would hold meetings monthly, I think it was, and so we got to know the leadership, the regional directors through Wally, of course, of all of these other agencies. And so when something came up that we felt that they should know about the situation, we could let them know. We could give them a heads up kind of thing, or we could say, look, maybe this needs funding, or this needs that, some resource that you have. So yeah, so there was a lot of cooperation, and then I also had made it a point, even beside that, to talk to other federal agencies, on a one-to-one basis. It was informal. Obviously, CRS can't make anybody do anything, really. So it was informal. It usually happened after hours, okay, at the hotel. There's a bar downstairs, there's whatever. And at that time, we weren't so prissy. You can't, we didn't drink during the day, okay, but, at night when you were, anyway, it was loosey-goosey, let me put it that way. And so it was a different atmosphere. And so we would talk to people. And most of the time, it was a very positive kind of thing. People are, what do you call it? They're territorial, whatever their agency is, they operate kind of in silos. So we tried to break that down a little bit. And I think the federal region, that was the goal of the federal regional councils, to break the silos. I don't know that's there anymore. But getting back to your other question, how much staffing does CRS need? I think they should revisit having the subject matter experts back on some level. I think that the people that they're hiring now, I don't know this absolutely, but it seems to me a lot of them come out of mediation, which is good. I'm not knocking it, but they need people with a broader, they need more than general practitioners and people with particular skills in other fields to help them along, or they need a better vetting of consultants that they can bring on from time to time. Okay. I don't know if they, I don't know what their budgeting is going to ultimately be, how many they're planning on. You got to ask the director that question. But I think if they had more people with different skill sets to complement the mediation. You need a lot of help when you're in formal mediation. I didn't get it. On my own, I called people that I knew or I had heard about and talked to them on the phone to get, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? How should you do it? That kind of stuff. But it was, you need, when you're in the community mediation, is very difficult. Even like, the Texaco mediation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the court, 25 sessions, right?
Sessions.
Is that it?
Oh my God, yeah, 25 sessions. I was exhausted by the end of this thing, but after that, let me veer off for a moment there. I've been veering off a lot, but after that, the case was decided in court, everything, they created Texaco, the court created another mediator, but it wasn't one mediator, it was a committee of people, including, heading it up was DeVal Patrick. They had judges. They had, it was a committee of about at least 10 people, maybe more, okay? But they were all top drawer people that had different kinds of expertise and everything else. And I don't know why, but at the end of it, so they came up with a settlement, $176 million ultimately it came out to. The law firm got 28 million. At that time, it was the highest money settlement in the history of the United States. But it wasn't one person, wasn't one mediator like I was. I was there alone. And they were lawyered, both sides were lawyered up, Well, it's a tough situation. But anyway, what where was I going with this?
We're talking about resources.
Resources, exactly. Resources. So you know, they need to, I think, they need to give a lot of backup to their mediators who are doing mediation work. Okay, because it's not a I don't think you should have two mediators. Okay, you could have a team situation, but you got to have people that can listen in and saying, maybe we should try this, or maybe or Miguel, you're not doing this correctly. Here's what I think you should. Here's maybe what you should try to do. Okay, because community mediation is very, very difficult because you have so many parties and changing leadership and all that stuff. And sometimes, like the technical case, it could be something very, very complicated, you know, particularly for one person whose total mediation training was maybe like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it was, you know. It wasn't like, you know, I took a course in it, you know, where you know, we had other students and a professor and, you know, all that whole, you know, the whole thing was like, we went to a training thing. Okay. Sometimes we were trained internally for 2-3 days. Sometimes we went for a more intensive training with an outside consulting group. But, you know, mediation training is another, I guess they're doing it now. I really don't know, but they're hiring people, from what I understand, that are trained mediators. Okay, well, they prefer to get that type of people.
So 2 quick things. First of all, I want to make sure I understand for the reader and the viewer. We define community mediation. So could you define what you mean by community mediation? Because I think in the mediation community, when we talk about community mediation, we typically talk about a community mediation center, which might mediate neighborhood cases, court-connected cases. You're talking about something different. Can you define community mediation?
Community mediation is mediation that takes place when there's some sort of disruption in a community, usually based on race, national origin, color, so forth. And now we have a whole other, you know, and usually it's because there's been some untoward incident or incidents, you know. And there's widespread media exposure to the incident, everything that happened. And you have a lot of people and a lot of people are interested in this event, and a lot of people show up. And you can lay ground rules out and say, only these people, who the hell are you to tell who can come be at the meeting? Okay. People pick them, and then there are people who impose themselves at the meetings. Okay. And you tell people you can only talk for 3 minutes or set whatever rule you have, that's going to go by the wayside pretty quickly. Okay. People are going to take over the meeting and you're there by yourself. Okay. And you say, well, gee, I thought we would agree to 5 minutes per speaker. And I say, yeah, you know, and, you know, or you only talk for 5 minutes or whatever it is, you know. So it's a different, it's wild and woolly. This is what I'm going to say to you.
I appreciate that.
Not structured.
Definition. We're on the same page. I just want to make it clear for those reading it.
Okay.
So you mentioned this briefly, that a lot of federal agencies at DOJ and elsewhere are siloed. Did you ever face pressure from anyone, even in DOJ, to stay in your lane?
Yes. I think I told you last time, Rudy Giuliani was a U.S. attorney at the time. And, you know, I got a very strong message from his top assistant to stay out of Williamsburg case. But you know, I talked to people and they talked to people, and basically Mayor Beam at that time said that I would be taken off the case over his dead body. That's a direct quote. He's dead now, but that's what he said.
Yeah. So
That's the only time I ever recall, anybody, maybe they implied it, but we didn't pay much attention to it anyway.
Okay. Fair enough. So who decides what types of cases you take and which particular cases you take on? Is that you, the national regional director, someone at headquarters? Were there any particular criteria you used?
Well, that's one of those depend answers.
Well, a law professor would never answer that way. So.
When I was with the crisis response unit headed up by Marty Walsh, he got a lot of information, and then he would call me. Ed Cabell was the other guy involved with me in my office, or he would call whoever it was and say, look, we just got this report, that this and this happened, and this is this place in your region, and I want you to go there and find out what happened and do an assessment, blah, blah, blah. So he's told you, where to go from time to time. Sometimes you heard it you got it, and you called him and you said, hey, Marty, so-and-so. And the regional director was my media supervisor, but I really reported to Marty Walsh in Washington. And
this is in your role, not as a conciliator, but as part of a crisis response unit.
Yeah, crisis
And
response
so
unit.
it's a little bit different. Typically,
Yeah.
conciliators would do something like this with their regional director.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. So it was a different, I don't know how the regional directors felt about it, but anyway, so that was the case there. On the regional level, basically, I kind of decided where to go. I mean, sometimes, yeah, but basically we had to monitor what was going on through the media. We had subscriptions to newspapers, like everybody was assigned a particular area within their region. So, we would get the newspapers and read them, or we would read a ticker tape, no social media back then. And then we'd bring it up to the boss and say, look, this is happening. And, anyway, so, and of course, so it depended on what was going on, who would tell you where to go where. Okay. But it was a lot of most of the cases, frankly, regardless of who, were initiated by CRS, not that somebody called us and said, listen, we did get people who would call up and say, I want you to go such and such a place.
Right.
Like when the vice president called.
Called the AG, right?
I said, Agnew said, listen, my condo is going to blow up. Come and save it.
So were there any local officials that reached out to you directly and said, hey, Miguel, we need help with this?
Yeah, we would get that, but it wasn't rare. We tried to get more of that by when things weren't happening, we would go out and quote unquote market CRS, we'd have a bunch of brochures, and we go to community X and we'd sit down with the mayor and the police chief and tell them, oh, this is what CRS does, and we're neutral, and we give them the whole, and here's my card. And, even if nothing, call me and expect some calls from me from time to time, So we did some of that. I don't know how successful it was, but yeah, we did get calls from chiefs of police from time to time. I did get a call once from the chief of Buffalo, Gil Churkowski. I think he became head of DEA at one time. Anyway, that was one guy that I recall, chief of police of a big city, that did call us.
Separate, so shifting a little bit, this is a question
Yeah.
I neglected previously. Were you ever asked to do something that you were unable to do, either by a party to a mediation or a community mediation, or an outside party, like a member of the media? And how did you deal with that? I'm sure the media asked you for confidential information.
Yes.
That I can't do
Right.
that.
I
But
can't. Yeah.
are there other scenarios where you were asked to do something you couldn't do? One other you mentioned is when you were abroad, you couldn't take mail, you couldn't take requests from the parties about citizenship or residency in the United
Yeah.
States. That's another issue that comes to mind. But
Yeah.
you were given specific instructions on that assignment, so that's a little unique. But are there other things that come to mind? If not, that's okay.
No, I can't think of any. I can't.
Okay.
It doesn't come to mind.
Did you ever have to combat? Now it happens all the time, but you probably experienced it. Did you ever have to combat fake news or misinformation in communities or in the media?
Yes, this happened quite frequently, particularly when there were demonstrations or some, things were happening. So, things would get out in the media or otherwise. And I relied very heavily on a guy named Shamsky, I think his name was. I don't know, it'll come to me. Art, his name was. I forget his last name at the moment. But anyway, Art was a media guy. He was in Washington. And his shtick, I think I told you this, was what's it called? Rumor control. I called it rumor verification. I thought that was a better, more accurate. And what we would do is come into a community and try to identify a group of citizens, and put it out a call for them to come in and be trained as rumor verifiers, and basically they were we would get rumors that, 300 armed black men are coming to town from X, and so we would send, and they were seen on Highway 31 at the outside gathering there, and so we would send out a person that was nearby and say, look, we got this rumor here, or and this is what it says. Could you go out there and see what's going on? Because we couldn't run all over town checking everything out. I mean, sometimes we did, but we preferred to have other people go out. At least I did, and other people and they would go out and say, there's nobody out here. Or, yes, it's absolutely true, run for your life, whatever it was. but anyway, that was the extent of that we had. That was the toolbox that we had, rumor verification. I thought it was pretty effective,
How did you train them? You trained these folks? Were they volunteers? Were they other?
Yeah, they're volunteers. They were volunteers. Basically, the training was this. We would line people up in rows. Let's say we had 25 people, so it'd be 5 rows of people, 5 each. And we would whisper a message to them, whatever it was, like the color blue is a primary color. Okay. Then by the time I got to the last person, the primary color was black or whatever it was. In other words, the story changed as it went from person to person. So that was one of the techniques that we used to basically tell people. Then the other thing was, look, we show them a crime scene, a videotape or whatever of it, and the person would say, okay, tell us what you saw. So people would tell us what they saw, but a lot of people saw it differently. The guy had a pistol. The guy had a revolver. the guy was unarmed. But no, so it all depended where they were sitting in the room or where the witness was. You could have been up on the second story. You saw it from this angle, that angle. So we try to teach people how, how people view things, and people also that people view things from their own background and experience and so forth. And so we try to show them this is what happens. So try to avoid that, when you report. That was it.
No, thanks for that. I love the first exercise you described was telephone. We would call it
That's
telephone.
right.
I think.
That's right.
But effective. And I've never gotten something so close where only one word has changed. So that's good for your trainees.
Yeah.
So I have a number of questions now that I don't think apply to you.
Okay.
Because of the time periods. I'm
Yeah.
going to read each one of them and I'm going to pause.
Okay.
And then if you have something you want to add,
Yeah.
go ahead. So in the last few years, what changes have there been in policing that have impacted your work at CRS? In the last few years, what changes have there been in the justice system that have impacted your work at CRS? And then in the last few years, what changes have there been in the education system that have impacted your work at CRS? Anything you want to respond to those, probably?
Well, I'm not working, so but there have been changes as we mentioned before.
Yeah.
Greater sophistication on the part of police, school systems, and so forth.
Absolutely. And what role did social media play in your work with advocates and communities? From a conciliator's perspective, was it useful? How did you prevent social media from disrupting the process? Okay, don't worry about that.
No.
And then another question for you. And this one you might have a perspective on because it changed the mission, the scope of the mission of CRS. So I'd love to get your perspective. How did the passage of the Shepard-Byrd Act alter the scope of your work? Or how would it have altered the scope of your work? And if you don't have a response,
I don't. It's no.
Okay. Do you have any advice for navigating the bureaucracy of CRS?
Lots.
Okay.
Well, I think I mentioned to you two earlier, we always had these an us and them relationship with the national office. The guys in the national office don't know what the hell they're doing there. They're totally isolated, in the, what do you call it, that circle that goes around Washington, D.C.
Beltway.
Yeah, the Beltway, exactly.
The swamp.
Yeah. So no, this was pretty common. But I think it exists in all organizations that are national in scope or even international scope, be they governmental or private. You just gotta understand that kind of perspective. Again, it depends on where you're standing at the time. The only person that I know that successfully navigated that is Tim Johnson, because Tim works at the national office and in the New York office. So he's had real
I'm talking
experience.
to him this afternoon.
Okay.
So, and that is actually the first question I have.
Tell him I said hello.
I will, Miguel.
Okay.
Of course. And I believe he asked me to say hello to you as well. We met a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, so that's fine. It depends on your perspective. And is there anything concrete that you would say to someone starting at CRS now?
With regard to navigating
bureaucracy.
Okay. Well, I would say understand that they have a point of view that is colored by their national perspective, and understand that you're basically, your perspective is the same as a soldier in a foxhole. You know, you come out of there, you're in the battle, and you see it from your point of view. It's not that they're wrong and you're right. That's what I would say to them. It's just that it's a different point of view. So put your mediator hat. This is what you do as a mediator. You know, you look at people's perspectives and try to understand and negotiate between them. That's the only thing I would say to them.
That's valuable. You've mentioned several folks, but I want to know specifically, who did you learn from in order to do the work well at CRS?
I learned from a lot of people, and I would say one of the principal, there were several good. One was Bob Lamb, Captain Bob Lamb. We call him Captain Bobby, but you know, it wasn't negatively, you know, was a thing.
Before you go on about
yes.
Captain Lamb, he was in Atlantic City, and he also went to the Seattle Regional
That's
Director's
right. He
Office
became.
Okay, just want to make sure we're talking about the same individual.
That's the same guy, exactly.
Okay.
Bob, to begin with, was a World War II veteran, and he was in the segregated army at that time, and he rose through the ranks of Atlantic City. At the time, Atlantic City might as well have been in the Deep South. Okay, not you know. There's a part of New Jersey, or that was or still is, I don't know, below the Mason-Dixon line. I don't mean that figuratively, I meant that actually, but you'd have to check that out. But anyway, this is what I was told. Atlantic City is below the Mason-Dixon line. So he came up and rose through the ranks, which was not easy given Atlantic City. This was before the gambling thing and all that stuff. But anyway, so he had to have political sense, and he was a very bright man, and he was big guy, so he had what I call command presence, and I guess it has to do with the fact that I was in the military, so I respected that somehow. It was, and it wasn't so much as what he said, but what he did. So he sort of led by example. So that was one person that I had a lot of respect for. He wasn't my boss. He wasn't my friend, so to speak. I mean, you know, CRS was a very small agency always. You knew everybody, okay? There was a esprit de corps, okay? It was like you were in the Marines almost. People believed in it. They believed it was a mission. And Bob had a thing, he called it, not the Holy Grail, but sacred trust. Something like that, I use that word or something like that. And so you went to work with CRS, you believed in it. You believed, I'm not saying everybody, but most people, okay? You knew them. So anyway, that's all I could say. So I had Bob Lamb, to stay on target here. Bob Lamb was a person I respected. Another person I respected was a guy named Jim Bettis.
Sorry, before you move off of Bob,
yeah.
Is there any specific story that you want to tell about it?
Well, Bob Lamb was in charge of the team leader when we went to Miami, you know.
Mm-hmm. For snowplow,
Operation Snowplow. and he held a meeting every morning, got the team assembled, you know, around the table, and he would say, Miguel, I want you to go here and I want you to do this and talk to so-and-so. He knew a lot of people. So he would say, maybe you should, maybe, and he never said, talk to so-and-so. He would say, I would like you to. He put it in that, in a suggestion mode, as opposed to a directive. And that was very effective, I thought. I thought about it. I guess he really wanted you to do that, but he never came across of you got to do this or else or something like that. He wasn't a boss. Okay, so I think he believed in this team building concept, I guess. We had at that time we had annual training sessions of the entire CRS. Everybody came from every region. We went to some hotel. And we had lectures about this. We had speakers about that. And then there were the after hour sessions, and you got to know people, and you became part of the team. Okay, so they never used the phrase team building. Okay, maybe it didn't exist then, but in retrospect, that's what happened. So Bob was one of those people that did that team building thing very, very effectively. And, most people liked him, they respected him. And that's, I guess, the most you can wish for, to be respected.
Yeah.
Okay, so we had another guy named John Toronis out of Chicago office. I worked with John. I got to go different places, regions and so forth. And he was out of Chicago. And anyway, we were also in Miami together. And John was like our expert on the Indian issues. But anyway, Toronis was another guy like that. Jim Perez. A few others, yeah, but mostly there were people that were, at the time anyway, we were peers. You know what I'm saying? But on a supervisory level, I always respected and liked Wally Warfield. Okay, he was my immediate boss. He was deputy regional director when I was there in the early days. So Wally, he could drive you crazy at times, but I really truly respected him. But he was not my peer; he was my boss. But
where'd the respect come from?
I admired how calm he always was. And I would say, I wish I could be that damn detached and calm as he is, But he gave you that aura of detachment. You knew he wasn't detached, okay? But he gave you that feeling that this is the way I see things, and you were getting a feeling you could borrow that calmness. And say, gee, I just mean that. I wish I was like that. That would add so much to my character. But I'm a little more on the passionate side, Not a little, a lot more.
I appreciate that. So, Miguel, I'm just going to hit the pause button real quick.
Okay.
So, Miguel, we've got a couple more questions to go through, and thank you so much for this session today.
Okay.
We'll see you probably in about a week.
Okay.
To have our
19th. Okay.
Yep. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.